Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphan Last, aka Skylar Madison, and today I'm going to go ahead and finish the Hamster Patreon drawing request image. Now, if you've been watching very carefully here at the very beginning, you just saw me Google a very specific type of lens flare. It's not that I was looking for that specific type of lens flare, it's just that that's the lens flare that Google came up with that I really liked, and I kind of wanted to replicate it, and I feel like I've got a little bit of a moderate success with that lens flare. Maybe not 100%, but it's pretty close. I'm pretty happy with it, and generally that's kind of how I feel with this entire image. The only thing that I'm really truly proud of is the background, the building and the clouds, the sun. All of that looks awesome, but the hamster looks fine. It's just I don't have any reason to draw a hamster other than a patron wanted me to draw one. I don't want to draw a hamster. Sorry, I didn't want to draw a hamster. Oh well. But that's life, you know. Once when you get patrons or clients and stuff like that, you gotta expect that you gotta work on things that maybe you don't want to, and that's fine. And in the previous video, I showed you guys the final image with the line work. The thing is if you actually pay attention to the last video that I posted just yesterday, I never actually drew out the balloon in vectors. That you just saw me just now draw out the balloon in vectors, and so I just did things in a really weird order. I started to lay down some of my flats before all of my line work was finished. I accidentally deleted some of my sketch before I was ready, and caused problems. I had to actually sketch out the balloon before I inked it again. And I created the lighting early on, and it's kind of a weird decision to do that. There are benefits to it, and there are disadvantages to it. For one, some of the disadvantages is that you don't really necessarily get, like, you may be using the same color on one side of the image as you are on another side of the image. But since the lighting is there, since it's interacting with completely different colors, it doesn't look like the same color anymore, and that's fine. You just need to figure out how everything's working together, and you need to expect that colors will interact with one another differently. It's kind of like colors mixing on the digital canvas, basically. I don't know. In a way, it's kind of like, you're mixing colors on a palette, but it's just a completely different way of doing it. Now, the way that I tend to kind of think of this image, at least, is that everything that we're looking at is on the shaded side of the building, the shaded side of the hamster. And so, it was an interesting challenge, and not only that, it's just I didn't have a reference or anything like that, and so this is kind of a reflection of how my brain perceives reality rather than necessarily how things are in actual reality. Who knows, maybe I could be completely wrong with how the light physics work inside of this video, inside of this image. I have no idea, but I'll figure it out one day. But yeah, the colors, that's what I was talking about. I started out with what I thought was the darkest colors that would be there, and then I thought, well, then I'll just have to add highlights, kind of going in a different direction, where I normally start out with the midtones and then I add shadows and highlights. Well, I wanted to try to start out with the shadows first, and with the hamster, by and large, I kind of did that, and it had a moderate amount of success. I did some things that are different with the hamster than usual. Usually when I add shadows and highlights, I use the pen tool. But when you're making something like hair or grass or something like that, it can be a real nightmare to try to get the pen tool to create something that's forming the organic shapes that you need for hair or grass. And so I wound up just drawing it out and then closing the shape and getting rid of the stroke and replacing it with fill. And I did a couple of things to kind of experiment to see what I could get away with the image, and trying to see if I could get kind of a brushy look to it. And that didn't really work out. But although I was trying to keep in mind that, in shadows, in an exterior shot, you're going to wind up having the color of the sky reflecting against the ground and then hitting other objects, especially in the shade, in the shadows. And so the shadows will appear kind of blue, and then the sun is yellow. And so I made sure, at the very least, that the highlights had some yellow to them. But everything else that I did, I wound up using adjustment layers. I really like the curves adjustment layer. I always have. Because, you have the master, which influences every single color simultaneously, getting it all darker and lighter wherever. And then you can manipulate the red, green, and blue colors. And what I wound up doing is I wound up ramping up the blue on the lower left-hand side of the channel, and that wound up getting it so that the darker values, the objects in shadow, had a reflection of blue in them. And then, with the yellow, you just kind of mix the red and the green together just right in the upper right portion of the channels mixer, and you wind up with, yellow. And that turned out pretty good. And midway through here, I decided, no, I want this to be a white house. It seems like the colors were clashing throughout the entire time. And so I decided it was a white house, and since it's on the shaded side, I tried to make sure that everything looked just darker than white. I guess since this is the only side of the building that we're looking at, without any sort of context of how much brighter it is on the other side, some of it may not appear to be, in shadow, especially since the sun is like shining right in our face and interacting with all of the colors. One of the things that I wanted to kind of do is, when there's a really bright light behind an object, things tend to kind of fade into being a silhouette. And early on I was thinking about doing that, but that just, all those dark colors were just clashing. It just made it impossible to really distinguish the difference between the hamster to the building and to everything else. It just made it kind of a jumbled mess, and so I decided to kind of lighten it up a little bit. Everything's pretty saturated. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. It probably is, but whatever. Yeah. And then I decided, okay, this side of the house would probably be darker than any other side of the house, even though both sides are dark. Came out looking pretty good. I don't know if the light physics are just right or not. I put shadows inside of shadows and such like that. I recall seeing, or at least I think I recall seeing, shadows inside of shadows. But it's kind of weird. There's so many things that you see in a day that even for someone who's, you know, been learning how to draw their entire life, it's still difficult to distinguish. What did I see? I mean, I saw 1,000 interesting things today. And here, you know, I'm adding the highlights to the actual windows, and I think that was a nice final touch. And then I kept working up until this point to where the Affinity Designer kind of freaked out at me, and basically, I think it's had a message that said that I was out of memory or something like that. I'm not really quite sure, but kind of got me a little concerned. Is there actually a limit to just how complex an image can get? Anyways, guys, this is what I'm willing to do for my patrons. If you're interested, feel free to click in the link in the video description below. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to get more notifications from me, feel free to click on the bell or go ahead and follow me on Twitter. A link is supplied in the video description below. And if you'd like to support my channel, feel free to click on the link towards my Patreon. That would be much appreciated. And if you'd like to see more of my content, feel free to click on anything appearing on the screen right now.